Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kenna Hernley, and I am the Senior Manager for the Cultural Education Network at Arts Council England. I'm really delighted everyone could join us today. I'm joined today by a few colleagues that I will introduce. First of all, we have Eve Collier. She is the Senior Policy Officer for the Enrichment Team at the Department for Education. We're also joined by Liz Kendall, who is the Head of Enrichment at the Department for Education. And I'm joined by two colleagues from the Meridian Trust. We have Martin Campbell, who is the Executive Principal of Meridian Trust, and Audrey Caldwell, who is the Director of Performing Arts at the Meridian Academy Trust. I'm also joined by two BSL interpreters today. We have Fiona and Harry, who is currently interpreting for us, and we also have a live captioner. If you would like to see the captions and you cannot yet, there is a link in the chat where you can access them. So please do also let my colleague Molly Davies know if you have any tech issues. She is on hand here to help. Our live captioner is also named Suzanne. So thank you so much. We're really delighted everyone can join us and that this event was so popular. We will be sharing the recording, some AI generated notes and the slides after the events. We are not admitting any kind of note-taking bots. A colleague had a bad experience with bot Zoom bombing a few weeks ago, so we are avoiding that as much as possible, just for safeguarding issues. But we will be sending out follow-up after the event and sending around the recording for you to share. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Eve, who's going to give a brief presentation, and then followed by that from Meridian Trust. Then we will take a short break and we will have some Q&A.
Thank you, Kenna. So I think I'm going to just start off. So thank you so much for inviting Eve and I to talk to you this afternoon. As you say, we are the enrichment team here at the Department for Education. We published our enrichment framework last month, and we are so delighted that it's live and we can start talking to people. People can start reading and starting to use that guidance to really kind of review their offers and improve what they deliver for their children and young people. So Eve's going to start us just with a bit of the context within which the framework starts, and then we'll do a little bit more on the orientation before passing over to the Meridian Trust, who will sort of bring enrichment to life with the example from their trust. So over to you, Eve.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. So enrichment has really become a bit more of a buzzword over the past few years. Obviously, a lot of that's coming from the sector, but it's also being referenced in a few of our big publications and big moments in education across government. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those and how it fits in there, and then we'll move on to the framework itself. So originally it was first really brought up as a major part of what the department thinks about when it thinks about education and thinks about what schools and colleges do within the government response to the curriculum and assessment review. So the curriculum and assessment review noted that the school day should be for more than just curriculum, for more than just lessons, and noted enrichment as being an important part of that. In the government response, we noted that this framework was upcoming, but also shared the initial enrichment entitlement. So this is an expectation of schools and colleges that they should be offering at a minimum a certain range and spectrum of enrichment activities, and really kind of putting that as being part of what a school does in the same way that a curriculum also does as well. We also had enrichment noted within the Youth Matters National Youth Strategy. So that's something that is cross-government but led by DCMS, where through a lot of youth voice work, there was a really clear emphasis on a few areas that children and young people really cared about. And one of those was things to do. So what do you do? What activities do you take part in? And so enrichment, both inside and outside of schools and colleges, was really marked as something that was important to children's experience, something that they really cared about and were asking government to deliver on. And finally, the school's white paper that was published a few months ago, which is Every Child Achieving and Thriving, also had enrichment as part of what we consider every child achieving and thriving to look like. So thinking about taking the school experience from a narrow one to a broad one, which includes opportunities, particularly opportunities that have been unequally accessed previously, making sure that enrichment is something that every child, no matter what school they go to, should be able to access and really experience. So that's been the kind of background to a lot of what's been going on enrichment, and has been kind of building up this expectation that enrichment is key and fundamental to what an experience at school or college should look like. Onto the enrichment framework itself, and I'll pass back over to Liz as soon as I figured out how to change slides. There we go.
Thank you, Eve. So the enrichment framework is non-statutory guidance, and it's designed to support all schools and colleges across England. So this includes special schools, alternative provision settings, doesn't include earlier settings. Now, if you have read the framework, hopefully you have picked up on something that was really important to us, and that is that the framework is clear that enrichment should happen across all education settings. So you should see a wide variety of examples of being used in the framework. So across primary and secondary mainstream, colleges, special schools, PRUs, we've got a lovely example from a hospital school, and specialist provider institutions in FE settings as well. And we've been really pleased with the kind of positive feedback that we've had from this. So people have really kind of recognised that breadth of opportunity and the breadth of settings that have been represented. And the second thing I just would highlight is the collaborative nature of the framework. So alongside having an expert working group that Arts Council England sat on with us alongside other colleagues from education sector and research, we had a series of engagement one-to-ones, roundtables, went out and spoke to schools, went to conferences to really try and understand the value and impact of enrichment on the lives of young people, what support is available, and the resources and the programs that are available in enrichment, and what challenges people face in delivering a really high quality inclusive offer for all children. Next slide, please, Eve. So to orientate you round the framework, it is hosted on gov.uk as an HTML. It's made up of several sections, and it's designed to be read in order and kind of in its entirety, but recognise that there's probably going to be sections that you'll come back to time and time again. So ones that are a bit more action focused. So for example, the benchmarks is probably something that will be used a lot. The framework starts with a policy background and an evidence overview. And then we have benchmarks supported by a series of case studies. We then have our resources section, which we'll go into a bit more detail later. A longer standalone evidence document for those people that really kind of want to get into the detail of that. We've got self-assessment and an action planning tool. And then finally, the details of the people who supported us through their membership of the expert working group. Next slide, please, Eve. So you will see in the framework, we have a definition, and I kind of wanted to pause on this briefly because we've seen, as Eve has mentioned, more and more focus on enrichment in recent years, but still a bit of a lack of consistency when people are talking about enrichment, like what does it mean and what's in and what's out. So what we wanted to do was to bring that forward into a kind of common understanding through a definition that we worked on with our expert working group members. So it describes enrichment's relationship with the curriculum, the value and outcomes that enrichment can help support, a reference to the breadth of activities, so picking up on these 5 categories that you see on your screen, and then when and how enrichment can be delivered and by whom. On these 5 categories of enrichment, as Eve said, we set these out in the school's white paper, and they are included within our second benchmark on a broad and well-rounded enrichment offer. They are not designed to be completely prescriptive. So if there is an activity and it doesn't neatly fit into one of these buckets, it doesn't mean don't do it. This is really about a guide to support schools to think more broadly about the offer that they provide for their children and young people. Next slide, please, Eve. And just to finish, so really integral part of the framework is the benchmarks. So we have these 8 benchmarks that are summarized in this slide. And I would encourage you to go and have a look at these and read them in detail. So we've developed these benchmarks alongside our expert working group with the intention of there being this clear and simple structure against which schools and colleges can kind of really look at their provision, evaluate it, review it, and make appropriate and considered improvements for their offers. And you'll see towards the end, there's this kind of focus on continuous improvement and monitoring. So there's sort of a cyclical sort of approach to the benchmarks as well. So I will pass over back to Eve, who will pick up on the resources included within the framework.
Yes, so the resources that we've included are not comprehensive. They're not everything that exists out there, but they are a starting point, a springboard for schools and colleges to think about when, particularly in reference to one of the benchmarks, which is to do with working in partnership. That benchmark is all about recognizing that there's a significant amount of expertise and a significant amount of capacity that exists outside of school or college gates, and that is useful and beneficial both for the children and young people who get to have a broader or wider array of opportunities, access a wider degree of expertise than is going to be available within any individual school or college, but also as a way to improve and support school staff as well. So there's a variety of stuff here. I'd really recommend clicking through. It's one of the wonderful things about working on the framework is seeing just how much amazing work and stuff is already out there. The other thing that I would flag here is that we also have our framework tools, and these are not something that schools and colleges have to use, but instead something that might be useful for them to, again, do that initial consideration about what their enrichment offer looks like and how to improve it. So it's a way that we would encourage them to take a look. And if you look at the benchmarks, they aren't particularly prescriptive. So it is truly down to schools and colleges to think, okay, well, what's the thing that we need to focus on? What's the appropriate actions that we need to take? So would recommend taking a look at those as well as a kind of understanding of what we are pointing schools and colleges to. I will briefly stop there and I think hand over to Martin and Audrey from Meridian Trust. You will be sharing a bit more about their enrichment offer, but also thinking a little bit about how, as a trust, they work in partnership and thinking about, particularly within that cultural education sector, about how that can really develop and improve a school or a trust's approach to enrichment.
Thanks very much, Eve. Can you hear me? Yeah, all good? Fantastic. My name is Martin Campbell. I'm one of the executive principals for Meridian Trust. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background at the very beginning of how the trust was set up and the kind of drivers we use to ensure the framework and ensure extending the boundaries of learning. So Multi-Academy Trust really set up in 2008, actually, by Swavesey Village College in its efforts to run a school called Northstowe, which is in a new community a couple of miles from Swavesey. We currently have 36 schools within the trust, 19 primary, 13 secondary. We have one all-through school, and that is Northstowe, and 3 special schools. It is one of the kind of unique features, perhaps, of this particular trust is that we operate with the A14 being the south being Cambridge and the north really being just into Lincolnshire and Stamford. And we operate schools around about 22 to 25 miles either side of that. We operate across 4 counties, 5 if you include the Unitary Authority of Peterborough. And we also run and train about 150 teachers each year through the Cambridge Partnership. The unique nature we have very thought very hard around how we cluster schools and in hubs. And I'll talk about that as we kind of get through this. We're a values-driven trust, and one of those values is extending the boundaries of learning. We have a very clear vision for that. In that a breadth of experience, and that has been from the very start of the trust through the curriculum and beyond, to ensure that there's an entitlement for every student to enhance and extend the curriculum. And we've done this right the way from the very start, and it has been a real factor that extending the boundaries of learning, not only as a key driver for the curriculum, but also to build a kind of a cultural experience for every child. We started to employ in around about 2017 directors. We were large enough to employ directors in particular subjects. And in 17-18, we employed Audrey, who we'll hear in a couple of minutes, as the director of performing arts. And I think that was a very key part of showing everybody within the trust and the community that performing arts was incredibly important. We believe there are kind of 4 key drivers for us to meet the 8 benchmarks within the curriculum. One of those drivers is the PP Charter. A second is the pledges system that we use. We have a comprehensive careers program, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And we use learning outside the classroom MARC as both a quality reassurance and quality assurance tool as well. So if I just talk a little bit about pledges, and this is really around character education. So pledges stands for participation, leadership, excellence, diversity, giving, environment and service. And pledges happens at primary and secondary and special school. To enable a pupil to gain a pledge, they have to choose one of 6 criteria within those 7 areas, and they can have a choice. And it's about bringing together both the school and what they do outside school, to make sure that it's a driver for building relationships, for competition, and essentially it is a mechanism for discussion at tutor level, at senior tutor level, at right the way across the school at senior leadership level. It is monitored. And we have a comprehensive system whereby we can look right the way across the trust at all the different levels of who has achieved either a bronze, a silver or gold. It is the expectation that every student achieves a bronze by the end of year 9. If you look to the right there, you'll see the kind of criteria that they can choose one of those to achieve the participation element, and they then have to achieve one in each of the criteria, one in each of the strands of that to achieve the pledges. So the other driver we use is the Pupil Premium Charter. There are 2 key strands that particularly we focus on for the enrichment framework. One is careers guidance. Again, I'll talk in a couple of minutes about that. And the other is the experience and enrichment strand. We have 3 key elements here because it is recognised right the way across the trust that disadvantaged students, there is an experiential gap. I think we all know this. And so we focus very heavily on making sure that they gain the Pledges Award and making sure that they are a focus. We expect them to attend in most schools, not all, but in most schools. These are free visits in years 7 and 8 to try and bridge that experiential gap. But we also give them entitlement to after school or during school clubs, which and one of those clubs is music, and I think Audrey will talk a little bit about that when she comes to it, but other clubs as well that we expect them to not only attend, but they will we will break down the barriers to ensure they attend and that they can access all of those. So the Pupil Premium Charter is an absolutely key document and a key driver for us. We have a comprehensive careers program. We have a director of careers. The reason I'm saying this is because I do believe that we not only encourage students to bridge that experiential gap, but also to partake in the careers program that we do. We work with a number of outside partners for that. We work with Complete Careers. There's an expectation, of course, to follow the Gatsby 8 benchmarks, but we also have an expectation that every secondary school gains the Quality in Careers standard, which creates a far deeper, if you will, careers program. In every school, there is a careers lead, and we hold regular meetings and network meetings for those leaders. There is a series of expectations and targets across every single school, one of which is 100% Gatsby Benchmark 8, but there are also other targets, including future skills questionnaires. I'm going to hand over to Audrey now to talk through a little bit around the performing arts.
Okay, thank you, Martin, and thank you everyone for allowing me to be part of this discussion. Because as Martin so articulates, the most powerful learning often doesn't happen within the classroom, it happens on the stage. As you saw that image before, we might go back a slide, because Martin, I think you might be my slide operator here. You know, it often happens on the stage. It can happen in the rehearsals and the workshops and the run-up to that particular performance. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but also as a multi-academy trust, we try to make that belief of powerful learning beyond the classroom a reality, and not just by treating arts and culture as enrichment really on the margins, but as an essential part of extended learning. So next slide, please, Martin. I will talk about partnerships that we've built, cultural experiences we've created, but also just practical approaches that we've taken to ensure that every child has access to these opportunities. And one of those is this right at the top here that doesn't read particularly well, so I'll just take you through it. It's minimum extracurriculum requirements. When I was first appointed in 2018, I was appointed as Director of Music for primary and secondary schools with an overview of performing arts. And then the National Plan for Music came out in 2022 and had the subheading of the power of music to change lives. And there were expectations in there, once again, non-statutory, of every school at some point having a choir and some point having an orchestra. Now, we've put that into our development plans, that this is a minimum expectation from all of our schools. And to a certain extent, we've attained that, although there are fluctuations as we go along. And also within that box at the top, one live experience per term. Now, that was also within the 2022 National Plan for Music document, but it's also something that was highlighted via a survey that I'm going to share with you of our younger students in Key Stage 3, some things that highlighted gaps that we needed to fill. So in terms of partnerships, as noted, we're across 4 counties. We've got very strong links with our instrumental music hubs, because they don't just provide one-to-one instrumental tuition. There's also whole class instrumental tuition programs that we utilise, particularly in primary schools, but also in our secondary schools. I put an example there as Ely. Ely is kind of a satellite hub centre from Cambridge Music Hub, but it means that there's outreach there over towards the east. And we've got primary schools and Ely College there in the 6th form that can use it on a Saturday morning. Now, that's also happening up in Northamptonshire with the Ferrers, using a lot of making connections with Northamptonshire Hub. Local theatres is something that we are working on more and more to create links with those theatres, because the survey showed that a lot of students to the age of 12 have not actually had that live experience. So even though we put in, and it's enshrined in the development plans within the primaries and secondaries, putting that in as well makes sure that students are then are able to go to their local theatres, to see plays, to hear music, in concerts, etc. But it also encourages our staff to see where those gaps are. And then outreach projects that are noted there. The Schola Cantorum one. Schola Cantorum is a semi-professional choir in Cambridge that are doing an outreach program whereby they're actually going into the curriculum and extra curriculum, almost blurring the lines in terms of singing, putting scholars into primary schools, and they're using Meridian Trust to do this. And we are seeking funding to spread that through our primary schools. We have 21 primary schools, and certainly within Cambridge, this is something that we are really building on, with singing being a key part of the national curriculum. Curriculum experiences. The annual Arts Festival happens in June and July. We started this in 2019. I will show you a bit more about that, how that's built up. But it's very much about collaboration, and it's very much about inclusivity and as many students as possible to get involved. And our numbers have topped 1,000 students in the last year. Annual school musicals, certainly with the development plans and with collaboration between all the schools. This is something that is happening in most schools, and very much whole school musicals. Dance and drama shows and plays, obviously. The Focus Cross Trust projects. Sometimes there are specific things that need some additional CPD. So whether that's choral or composition to meet the demands of what's happening within the curriculum, but also challenging students. The theatre design is just another aspect that's been thrown up with GCSE, that we need to make sure that students are able to access particular courses. And theatre design is something that's come up in the last couple of years. Community projects, I put in examples. Stratton in Biggleswade have a Stratfest. North Cambridge Academy, Arbury. SVC Music School started in 2008 and is still ongoing, and that's for age students 4 up to 18, covers all range of things. That's something that I started and it's still going. And we've got community choirs in various areas, often run by music teachers, bringing in the community to work with students. And then the Careers Week, which Martin has already described, but it's really also bringing in students just to show, I suppose, show our students that it's not just performing routes that they can follow. There are all sorts of other things within the music and theatrical industry, and if they can't see it, they can't be it. So it's really showing students what's out there. Next slide, please, Martin. So that's our Arts Festival, which in 2019 started with 9 schools. So it was one showcase, and right the way to 2026, it's built up. Those hub showcases are very much within the particular locales. So the primary hub showcases are Peterborough, Bedfordshire, East Cams, and then another area of East Cams. And it just brings different primary schools together to highlight the very best in their performing arts. The final secondary showcase was just last week, and that's very much bringing the 3 disciplines of dance, drama, and music together. And we interweaved it this way this year with a reimagining of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. A bit of a challenge, but we managed it. And we're very, very lucky in that we get really, really good support in terms of our audiences, but also our IT department, so that we have live audiences at all of these showcases, but also online audiences that can reach 4,000. And I think what's really, really good and probably worth highlighting is for the secondary schools, they will do these musicals with great sound and light kind of experience around them. But for the primaries, we bring them into venues that we can set this up and give them that experience in terms of a live audience, proper sound and lights that they can be heard that they may not have access to within their own schools. Thank you. Next slide. Thank you. And so 2016, we had 4 primary showcases, 21 schools, 550 student performers. And then, as mentioned, 12 secondary schools took part. Last week, 560 student performers. And we do collaborative things, like we have a collaborative choir. And you may think, how do we rehearse a collaborative choir if there are 12 schools and 4 counties? We do it online, which is something that we've been doing for years. I can't hear the students, but I can still teach them the music. But when they come together and it all clicks and they meet students from other schools. It's a really wonderful thing to behold on that day. And the same thing through a jazz orchestra. They don't rehearse online, but they do meet online. They share music. They look through specific challenges, and then they meet and bring it together in a day. And it really is quite powerful, the learning. And, you know, obviously just underlines that, extending the boundaries of learning. Thank you, Martin. So back in 2024, and I'm due to do this again in 2026. And I want to do it not just with Key Stage 3, but draw it back into the primary schools as well. We did a survey, and I'll show you the questions that you can read at leisure later. But these were the headlines. 23% currently have lessons on musical instruments. That's your, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds. 36% used to have one-to-one lessons. Majority been to the theatre. 76%, I think that was the biggest one that hit me. 76% do not take part in any performing arts clubs at school. And if we go to the next slide, please, Martin, there was some further analysis there. So top left, currently having lessons on a musical instrument. 34% of those were students playing piano. Other instruments, guitar, drums, there's keyboards, but orchestral instruments getting less popular. That's a national trend. You know, how many students, if you went into a school now, how many students would be learning to play viola or oboe or bassoon? Now, I remember it back in the 90s and into the early 2000s, but it's dipping. What do we do to shore that gap? 36% used to have one-to-one lessons, but costs are a factor. And this draws us back to the PP charter that Martin mentioned, because part of that PP charter was 50% to 100% support and funding for instrumental tuition. And that question for me was to my staff: Are you making sure that you're using this and you're talking to your head teachers and making sure that those students are being supported? There's some stats to do with theatre. So 12% of students not going to the theatre at all, had never been. And then focusing, where were those students? Was there a particular part of our trust that those students came from? And what do we need to do? And actually it was Northamptonshire. And ticket costs cited, so we can then go to the theatres and go, we'd like to be able to bring 100 students. How can you support us there? There's that statistic again. 76% do not take part in any performing arts clubs at school, yet 77% enjoy a range of performing arts activities as hobbies, whether that's painting, playing guitar, sorry, not painting because that's obviously art, but playing guitar or maybe singing to themselves. So what do we need to do in order to make sure that we are providing those activities that draw them in at school? Sorry, next slide, please, Martin. We'll just look at that very quickly. Those were the questions in the survey. Not necessarily completely expansive, but I wanted to make it quite clear and simple and direct in a way that students could just click on it and answer it. So I will be doing that again, September 2026, but probably casting a wider net. And then just final slide from me. These were the next steps to staff. You know, they had the survey, they had the development plans that included what enrichment they needed to work towards. And it was, some statements and questions around that. You know, what is the quantity of performing arts activity in your school? What percentage of students are taking part in performing arts activities? You know, when I was head of music at Swavesey Village College for 22 years, Molly taught you, there was something like 20%, 20 to 25%. Is that realistic? Is that still manageable nowadays? Because I would say it's a pretty good target to go for. And if students are not being engaged by the current list of performing arts activities, what other things can we engage them with? Are there other things that can be done? And where do we get the support from? But also looking at the content and organisation of the curriculum. Because if I'm asked from a head teacher like Martin or somebody, extracurricular activity in performing arts is not very strong, music is not very strong in terms of extracurricular, what's the best way to have an immediate impact? I would say go through the curriculum, have students singing, then that bleeds into your extracurricular and enrichment and students then and following it in a different direction. Obviously, student take up a key stage 4. We are all inclusive in Meridian Academy Trust. If a student wants to do GCSE or BTEC music, drama or dance, we support them. If they need additional lessons, we make sure that that is provided. Identifying priorities and possibilities linked to the curriculum. So say, for instance, within our primary schools, making sure that the instruments are there. The ukuleles in schools, recorders, dare I say, keyboards, and tuned and untuned percussion instruments, and enough for a class set. Identifying powerful networks to support. So we mentioned music hubs, but also the theatres and anybody else that we can draw in. And then also first steps, what would make an impact immediately and what needs more support and time. And one thing that I've found, and music staff within the secondary schools, one of the impacts that we can do immediately is with year 7, doing a scheme of work that is based entirely on vocal work, vocal techniques, learning music, learning to sing in harmony, bringing in all of the parents for year 7. So whether that's 180 year 7 students and all their parents, but doing a short concert, and that's a really, really big splash. But from that, you then can take it into extracurricular activities and other enrichment. I've sort of gone off on a tangent there, but I hope that that sort of encapsulates everything that I wanted to say in terms of performing arts at Meridian Academy Trust.
Thanks very much, Audrey.
Thank you.
I am just going to the final 3 or 4 slides here. So not only is there a trust expectation for schools to take part in activities that the trust pulls together, such as athletics, such as archaeology, such as performing arts, as Audrey talked about, but there is also an expectation that each school has a comprehensive, bespoke, expending the boundaries of learning offer. I'm just going to highlight 2, which really brings in partnerships as well. On the left there, you'll see North Cambridge Academy's post in January, February this year. They worked with Trinity College, Cambridge, where they took, because of the geographical location, the expectation is that one school in that geographical hub, they produce an event that all other schools must go to. And so one event North Cambridge produced was a spelling bee over 2 days at Trinity College. So there's an element of careers, element of aspiration, an element there of motivation for students to attend. Absolutely fantastic in year 7. The other one was on your right there is every year we take 12 students from each school go to work at Chester House in Northamptonshire, whereby it's a live site dig. They have a fantastic day, and they do an element of science in that. An absolutely fantastic day. Going back really to that, the key drivers there. The one driver that we do use to ensure that both for quality assurance and for reassurance is use accounts for learning outside the classroom mark, and we have been using it now for almost 5 years. We have had one accreditation round, and we're in the second now accreditation round. Every school is tasked with trying to get to gold. In a lot of cases that happens. If it doesn't, then we've identified areas and gaps we need to fill. We believe by using this mark, it has enabled us to work strategically across schools, to support schools, to see where the gaps are and the audit. It's enabled trust-wide consistency in terms of practice across areas, fostered collaboration. We have networks. That is kind of part of my job, is to build those networks. I think it advanced quality experience, and there's no question that it expanded the breadth of provision because of those networks. Finally, we take 164 students each year to Wales. They are all disadvantaged students. We take 12 from each school. Schools don't have an opt-out. They must opt into this. So about 164 students this year for an incredible week. We take them to Wales. And how does that work with arts and culture? In between rock climbing and on the walks, and when they're on the beach waiting to go into the canoes, instructors talk to them about the mythology of Wales. They talk to them about how excuse me, they talk to them and use the countryside and beaches, the mountains and the weather to actually give these students an experience and show where legend and myth has come from. And I think that's it from me, Eve.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to take this time to kind of map across a little bit of what was, I think is really useful in terms of understanding how kind of partnerships that Meridian Trust do really, really well map into framework, and how I hope that this creates a really good space for people working in cultural education to be able to work effectively with schools and colleges. So I think some of the elements that we really see as being important is firstly that strategic connection. So what is it that a school or college or trust is doing strategically, and how can the work that happens in enrichment tie into that? So is there a system in place that is able to really easily be translated across, whether that be something like the pledges system, which I love. I've got a version of it somewhere in my locker. Whether it be kind of a case of how it fits into other statutory requirements like Gatsby or like pupil premium requirements as well. But equally, I think one of the important elements is the idea of working in partnership and building up those partnerships in a variety of different ways. And I'm going to ask a question when it gets to Q&A, actually, in terms of how you have approached prioritizing and understanding which partnerships are going to be most important. And then I think the other two things as well is understanding about that kind of data requirements and data understanding. So how being able to figure out about, okay, well, what is missing and what is lacking, and how can we kind of reach and work with schools and colleges to develop where there are gaps, or make sure that maintaining the strengths that there already are. And that would be part of what we'd call in both our accessibility benchmark, which is about supporting those who are generally less able to access enrichment. It's about making sure that you're focusing on outcomes, which we really encourage schools and colleges to do, whatever those outcomes are for the school and college, which will be different according to whether it's a primary school or whether it's a college or whether it's a special education school, and also making sure that that's a continual improvement that happens. So I think that's a really clear read across the work that we've been doing in terms of getting that framework, and also potentially a useful insight as to how many schools and colleges might be thinking about their enrichment offers. In that case, I'm going to hand back over to Kenna on any Q&A that comes up, and we'll be very happy to answer.
Hello, yes, please do feel free to enter any questions you have in the chat, or if you do choose to unmute yourself, you are welcome to ask the question. Just be aware that you will be on the recording. Please do feel free to ask questions, and I will read them out or call on you as we go through.
I might actually take this opportunity to ask that question directly to Martin and Audrey while questions are going into chat. So in terms of creating those sorts of partnerships, how have you decided how you're going to develop partnerships, which ones you're going to prioritize, and where you're going to reach out, if that's okay?
Audrey, yeah.
Okay, I mean, the short answer is it's by needs. Sometimes it's by policy. It's what's coming up in terms of what's been encapsulated via, Ofsted inspections, Ofsted documents, but even the National Plan for Music. There's a new plan that's just come up called Turn It Up, which aims to integrate music into an overhauled national curriculum. So we'll be rethinking things again. So I think it's by necessity. So, and I mean, there's so many strands to it, and it depends on the location as well, that it's trying to make sure that you come up with priorities that everybody can kind of buy into. So that minimum expectation that I mentioned right at the start, which sounds really, really obvious, but isn't happening in all schools. But just putting that in, that it should be enshrined within development plans. But then on top of that, as I said, policy, whether it's national policy or whether it's something within the trust, but also just the needs of specific schools and students, I think is the short answer. I could go into lots and lots of detail to do with different schools, but that's kind of the drivers.
Yeah, I absolutely echo that. And there's one other element which was brought out really in terms of North Cambridge, for example, going to Trinity College. Location matters, of course it does. However, championing the bright spots in school and utilising the expertise which in school, that for me is really, really important. For example, the head at North Cambridge is a linguist, and she champions languages right the way across that school, and therefore her connection with Trinity College was all about languages, but she championed that and she wanted to spread that, and that's championing the bright spots. I think is really, really important as well.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. As school funding is so under pressure, how are schools expected to work in partnership with outside organizations as part of their enrichment framework where there is a cost involved?
Yeah, and this is where, you know, this is always will be the difficulty. Difficulty in terms of staff, but not only difficulty in terms of priorities. It is where the school places the value of partnerships, of links, of extracurricular activity. It has to be dependent on both school and perhaps trust as well. We value extending the boundaries of learning, and therefore we champion that in schools, and we try and remove as many barriers as possible to schools not taking part in the different activities. So I think it is always, we are of course reliant, as all schools are across the country, we are reliant upon the goodwill of teachers and of staff who take part in these activities, and that is what we have got to kind of foster. And that is in terms of interviews, in terms of the value. When you do come in, we make it really, really clear that we value this and we would love you to take part, and of course that is up to you, but essentially you know, it is the priority of the school and of the trust to make sure that children get a full cultural experience. Would you like to join us in kind of fostering and ensuring that?
I'll also bring in Liz as well to kind of respond from DSV perspective.
Thank you, and you know, great answer from Martin. You sort of said sort of what I was going to say, but from a non-government perspective. So I think it's a really good fundamental question, something we're really aware of. We know that schools and colleges already do a lot of fantastic work to deliver enrichment, and we know that they are not alone. There's a huge amount of partnerships. When we were drafting the framework, we were really clear that we don't want to set up expectations or say that schools should be doing stuff or signposting to things that have costs attached to it. So all of the resources are free. All of the case studies that we've used, you don't necessarily have to have funding behind them. So there's sort of that element to it. But also we know that there are schools with particular challenges or schools in disadvantaged areas. So we have targeted programmes that support them. So for example, we'll be rolling out £22.5 million with DCMS for the enrichment expansion programme. So that's going to directly benefit schools across the country. So it's a little bit of a balance there, but something that's really important to recognise, I think.
Thank you. Another question in the chat. As a regional theatre who believe in the power of the arts to support learning, particularly for students with neurodivergence, how do we go about shaping that offer to sit within this framework? And what would be the best way to target these offers in the best way?
I might come in on this if that's okay. I think the framework actually works really well for this, in that our focus is very much not just on making sure that the young people who already do 1,000,001 enrichment activities do a bunch more, though that's great if they do. It's really about looking at who normally misses out. And so for that reason, we have a benchmark which is about access and about making something that is engaging and accessible for all pupils. And in particular, that includes pupils with SEND requirements. So that's to do with building up an enrichment offer that proactively is seeking to make things engaging. So things thinking about what are the barriers to access going to be like? Is that going to be different for neurodiverse children? But also thinking about pupil voice. So what is it that neurodiverse children are saying that they want? What is it? Is there a version of the kind of cultural activities that's going to be particularly attractive to them? But also, I guess, reactively thinking about, well, who actually isn't taking part? What is the gap that exists? So we have a really clear expectation around making sure that you look at that participation gap. And this is what I think, Audrey, you were talking about so well in terms of thinking about, well, who isn't accessing? What is the disparity? And I think there's that really interesting one of a lot of them do various performing arts activities as a hobby at home, but aren't necessarily bringing that into school. So what can be done to kind of bridge some of those gaps as well? So I think in terms of that, the framework is providing a really clear incentive for schools and colleges to do that active thinking about how do you make sure that everyone gets included and people aren't left behind by the kind of push towards enrichment. But Liz, Audrey, or Martin, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
No, not really. Thank you. You're on mute, Audrey.
Yeah. So I would just say, Eve, you just answered that absolutely brilliantly. But also, just in terms of communication, I mean, what we have had to do, and I can see that there's a question here about funding. And I'll be interested to just hear a little bit more about that. Is just fostering relationships within particular pockets where those gaps have been revealed, and what can be done there. And just as you say, it is about not just nodding towards putting something in place just to tick a box, but really bringing, it is a bit of a cliche, but bringing them up to the table and making sure that they're part of that. And I think it's just communication between the community, between theatre groups, as mentioned here, and within schools and communities.
Thank you. We'll take this last question in the chat and then we'll wrap up. So how can we find out more about the DCMS enrichment funding?
Cool. Sorry, there was a bit of a moment between me and Liz being like, who's going to take this one? So there's information that is available on gov.uk. So Liz, I don't know if you'd be able to pop some of that in, but there's a few sources of funding that are kind of going around. The one that Liz was talking about was the 22.5 million that is going to the Enrichment Expansion Programme. That's a joint programme with us and DCMS that is aiming to support enrichment coordination within areas that have specific challenges and within schools to help them meet the benchmarks, but also particularly meet the benchmarks by bringing in that community resource as well. I'm unable to provide any further information at this point about the areas or specific schools that are being targeted within that, but we will share that information in due course when we are able to. There's also some information as well, which when we published the enrichment framework, there was also an announcement about Every Child Can, which is a pot of funding funded by the Dormant Assets Fund. Sorry, that was a lot of funding in one sentence. And that's a 132.5 million that is going towards youth provision. And that's both youth provision in the community, but also we're exploring ways that it can be used to support schools as well. So that's in alignment with the 5 categories of the enrichment entitlement. And recently we've just announced a few things that are happening with that. So I think it's music in libraries and it's creative mentoring for children in care. So there's more information about that available as well.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to also say that the Cultural Education Network can also help you develop and plan your enrichment offers. So please do book a one-to-one with one of our specialists. They are free if you would like some additional help and support. We can also signpost to partnership opportunities in your area. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We will be following up with some notes and the recording.